Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Daniel, and today in this video we'll be covering my round 1 game from the 2022 May Open. It was an online event and my online rating at the time was 1887. So I was playing black, and let's take a look at what happened in the game. It was relatively short, so we'll be looking at the full game. So my opponent opens with e4, c5, Sicilian. So here's c3, this goes into the Alpin variation of the Sicilian, so white tries to take over the full center. d5, so d4 as expected, just some natural developing moves here. So knight a3, knight to b5, threatening knight to c7, which would fork my king, rook, and my queen. Queen to d8, stopping that, bishop to f4, resetting up this threat of knight to c7, which is now protected by the bishop. Knight to d5, attacking the bishop, simultaneously defending c7 again. Here my opponent makes the first, we'll say actually blunder of the game, which is playing the move bishop to e3. In fact, at this point, this move bishop to f4 is already a bit dubious here, because bishop to f4 first, so it allows firstly my knight to jump into this nice outpost square on d5, which attacks this bishop, and also the bishop doesn't really have a really good square to go to. Best move here, in fact, is actually to play bishop to g5, attack my queen, but here I can simply play a move such as bishop to e7, and I'm developing another piece, preparing a castle, so this position is pretty good for me. Bishop to g3 is another option. However, here I have a6, simply kicking the knight away. The knight has to go back to a3, which is a really passive square, and they have to try to get to c4, but when they play knight e3, if I want to prevent knight to c4, I can simply play b5 even. This isn't a good move, obviously, but if I really wanted to prevent knight to c4, I could even consider b5. But there's other moves here, such as c takes d4, opening up this bishop, which will take this knight, so that white has terrible pawn structure. For example, let's say c takes d4, then after bishop takes a3, b takes a3. This pawn structure isn't good. I have b5 in the future. This knight won't ever get kicked out. And in general, this position is just really good for me. So here, bishop to e3 was the move my opponent played. Bishop to d2 is really passive. Your bishop's not coming out ever. Only square that the bishop can go to on this diagonal is g5. And as I mentioned, there's bishop to e7 there with castles. For example, after bishop to d2, I can even play bishop e7 here. So there is never bishop to g5 because it's now covered twice. And this bishop is just really passive, and it's kind of getting in the way of white's pieces. Not to mention I can play a6 here, kick the knight away, etc. So bishop to e3. But this allows a favorable trade for me, which is knight takes e3. So although my knight's really well placed here on d5, this nice outpost square on d5, I know that in this type of in the Alpin variation, the position will generally get pretty open, so I prefer to have bishops than knights. Besides playing knight takes on e3, white has to take back with the f pawn, and in the future I might have some counterplay along the f file. Queen to h4 maybe at some point, combined with my dark square bishop, can maybe stay on this on the a7 to g1 diagonal. Considering there's no f pawn, this would be pretty good. So knight takes e3, f takes e3, bishop e7, simply developing. A5, cementing this knight here. Castles, queen to b6. So queen to b6, my idea is to play something along the lines of a6, rook a d1, putting my rook opposite the queen, hitting at this b2 point, which is a bit weak. So rook to b1, anticipating that I have the a6 idea, followed by queen takes b2. Pawn takes in the center, pawn takes, and then here rook f to d1. Similar idea to rook a to d1, however, I want my a rook on the c file, since this is an open file once I move my knight. So I prefer to have my other rook here so that it doesn't get in the way. For example, if I had played rook a to d1, rook a to d8, sorry, then I have to move this rook back to c8 and then move this f rook to d8, which is kind of a hassle and kind of just wastes a couple of moves. So that's why I play rook f to d8. Queen to e1, sidestepping. Bishop to f5, simply dropping back, hitting the rook. So now I have a6 at some point probably. Rook back to a1. Here I firstly play bishop to b4. The reason why I firstly played bishop to b4, this is actually the point where I spent the most amount of time. Because I realized that after a6, my opponent has the move a5 here, which is annoying, counterattacks my queen, and it's actually defended twice, so I can't actually take. So in fact here, computer here actually suggests knight takes a5, queen takes a5, then after queen takes and rook takes, then I can take here. However here, after something like rook takes, my opponent's attacking this pawn. I can't really get at this pawn because it's already defended. And in fact, this position looks completely equal. In fact, it's white's putting on the pressure, and it's actually slightly easier for white to play, in my opinion. So instead, I firstly toss in this move, bishop to b4, so that next move when I do play a6, firstly this queen won't be defending because my bishop now inhabits this diagonal. Secondly, I have another piece which is defending the a5 push with this bishop here. So a5 anyways by my opponent, counterattacking my queen as I attack their queen. Here I just simply take this pawn. Not in the game, I remember I wasn't really too sure why my opponent gave me this pawn. I assume maybe they miscounted, but their rating was really high. In fact, I was pretty sure they were a national master, so I wasn't really sure why they played this move. But I mean, I get a pawn and I get a better position, so I'm not complaining. Bishop takes a5, still attacking their queen. Queen to g3, maybe looking at some potential counterplay opportunities. Hopping the knight in, something like this. With this open f-file, maybe some pressure on f7, but that's really long term. And so here a6, kicking the knight away. Knight to a3 also is a bit of a weird square to go to. However, here I expected a move like knight to d6. Keep in mind the knight's defended by the queen on g3. To maybe get rid of this bishop, or maybe like knight h4, put some pressure here. I didn't really expect knight to a3. I thought maybe knight to c3 was even better than knight to a3. But knight to c3 actually, there's actually queen takes b2, I realize now. There's a lot of pressure here. So knight to c3 actually isn't good. So knight a3 is still a bit dubious. I thought knight to d6 was a bit better, although this position's really good for me. So no matter knight to d6 or knight to a3. So queen takes b2. A lot of pressure on these pieces with this bishop coming in as well. This pawn might be a bit tender if I go to d2. Queen back to f2, defending. Here b5, gaining space. I have two passed pawns on the queen side. I should probably push them. b4 next. Rook to c1, attacking this knight. Here I firstly defend my rook. I defend the knight. Better move here is actually bishop to c3, blocking this attack on my knight. It's defended by the queen, and just putting pressure on a lot of pieces here. Bishop to d3. If the king's not defending the queen, just a lot of pressure in general. Instead, I play rook a to c8, and then here I play bishop to c3. So obviously my opponent's offering a queen trade, but here if they trade queens, then I'm attacking both rooks and this knight in fact, and my opponent will have to concede material. Here bishop to c3, bishop back to e2. At this point my opponent's position is really difficult to play. They're just sitting around at this point, not doing much. And here I actually unleash a very nice tactical find. This is actually the point where I spent the second most amount of time in the game. I unleashed this move, knight takes d4. Knight takes d4. Firstly, it's a very nice move. So let's look at what happens if pawn takes d4. So if pawn takes d4, then I have bishop takes d4, setting up a pin here. The queen to the king. Obviously you can play knight takes d4, but if knight takes d4, then I have rook takes c1. That's why this is actually a really nice move, because knight takes d4 actually clears out both of these pieces so that my rook can actually take on c1. So if pawn takes, bishop takes, knight takes, then rook takes c1, rook takes c1, queen takes c1. After move like bishop to f1, I can play queen takes a3, and in fact I'm up a lot of material here. So this should be an easy win. Combined with the fact I have two passed pawns, this is very easy to win. So let's take a look at what happens if knight takes d4. Knight takes d4, then same story, a similar story. Bishop takes d4, setting up some threats here. And let's say you play rook to d1, let's say. Then here I simply can drop back bishop to c5, attacking this knight, and this knight is actually in fact trapped because knight to b8, knight to b1 looks like a safe square, but that disconnects the two rooks, and I can simply take this rook here. And so yeah, this knight's actually in fact trapped on the edge of the board. So after knight takes d4, also I should mention the original threat of knight takes d4 is to take advantage of this situation happening here. Obviously, if my opponent plays, let's say, random move h3, then I can play knight takes on e2, check, and then I can pick up the rook after. So that's the initial threat. So after knight takes on d4, my opponent played e takes on d4, and after bishop takes d4, here my opponent resigned the game. So, very nice game. The game only lasted 26 moves, which was very, very nice. A very nice quick win, capitalizing on some very nice play. Capitalizing on the fact that my opponent played the move bishop to e3 early on, trading off this knight, and then getting my pieces really active. Finding queen b6, putting some pressure on the b2 pawn indirectly, a6 ideas, and just a lot of ideas in general that made my opponent's position crumble. And also, as I mentioned, my opponent was a national master. I believe this is actually my first win. This was my first win at the time against a titled player in any sort of tournament. So I was really happy with the result. And yeah, hope you all enjoyed. Thanks for watching.